back to the doctor. She asked more or less the same questions she had on the previous occasion. What we have to do is reverse the depression. One way to do that is through ECT, electroconvulsive therapy. I know it sounds terrible. In a sense, it applies a brake to the process and gives the brain a kind of new start. No, she said. No. I don't think so, I said. I think we'll just have to ride this one out. I understand, the doctor said, looking at Linda. You've been walking, so that's good. If you have the strength, it would be good if you could do some of what you normally do. I don't do anything. How's it going with your children? Do you spend any time with them? Linda shook her head. Yes, you do, I said. You've watched TV with them. That's good, Linda. Perhaps you should try to read to them as well. She read to them that afternoon. First she read for Jon, while Heidi was in the hall waiting her turn. Linda wasn't getting any better. Whenever I was alone with her, I told her the same. I said I loved her. I knew she was having a terrible time, but it would pass and everything would be fine. She never answered, nor did she look at me as I spoke. We walked to the little park, sat there for a while. I realized this was probably going to be long-term. She read to the children every afternoon and was worn out afterwards. But I was so happy she could do it. This was like a lifeline. That is to say, this was the case for Heidi and Jon. They accepted everything as it was. While Vanya, on the other hand, was filled with a mass of conflicting emotions she didn't know how to handle. One evening she had a furious outburst. Linda was sitting in a chair in the living room, and Vanya started hitting her as she shouted, "You're ugly! You're ugly! You're ugly!" That evening Ingrid asked me if I had the second novel in audiobook format. I nodded. She asked if she could borrow it. That was the last thing I wanted. Why would she want to go through it? What else could I do but find her a copy and hand it over? This evening I could hear she hadn't fallen asleep as she usually did. When I turned in, she was still awake. The next morning she said she hadn't slept a wink all night. She'd been listening to the novel I had written. She said I had sent it to her just before it was about to go to press. As she said this, she was standing in front of the stove making pancakes. I stood with a cup in my hand, on my way out to smoke a cigarette. I was afraid of her. But I couldn't go, nor could I defend myself. I had to stand there and listen and concede she was right. She was furious with me. But in the bedroom we had Linda, whom she loved and whom she feared would die. In the living room we had her grandchildren, whom she loved and for whom she would do anything. The only argument I had was that she had been given the book to read in advance, and she had approved it. Beneath everything lay the unspoken reproach that it was because of what I had written that Linda had lost her bearings and was in bed. and if she exerted herself to the maximum, she could stretch out a hand and touch it. Be there for a few minutes, have a child on her lap. No more, though. Nothing of what a life consists of. Giving them some fruit, telling a joke, asking them about something that interests them, dressing them, going with them to the park. All this is easy, and therefore nothing we appreciate while it is happening. Evening meal in the kitchen. Linda in the bedroom. Without looking at me, Ingrid said, "Have you considered the consequences of writing about your children?" "Yes," I said. "How will it be for them when they grow up? Everyone knowing who they are. Have you taken that into account?" "That they're vulnerable?" This is her daughter, I thought. Let her be angry at me. "I don't think there's any danger," I said. "I don't think that any of what I've written is dangerous." It sounded hollow. She looked at me. The children slipped down from their chairs. They hadn't noticed anything unusual. There hadn't been any raised voices. I went online and searched for a holiday home in Oosterlin. We had to get out of the apartment. We wouldn't manage a long journey, though, so Oosterlin was perfect. At Flesland Airport, people looked at me. Some came over to say something about my books. One of them, a woman in her late 50s, said she'd been to all the places I described in Surland. "How big Vanya and Heidi are! But I won't pester you any more. Have a good journey home. I suppose you're going to Malmö, aren't you?" Vanya looked up at me. "Do you know her, Dad?" she said. "No," I said. "Never seen her before." "But how did she know who we were?" "I've written a book about us," I said. "You've written a book about us?" she said. "Yes." "What's in it?" "All sorts of strange things. You'll have to read it when you're older." We passed through security. People stared at us. The next morning, when I was working in one of the living rooms, I suddenly heard a din in the other.
May the good Lord be with you down every road you roll.
Linda had put on a record. It was 6:15, and she had turned the volume up loud.
May the good Lord be with you down every road you roll.
Forever Young, the old 80s hit. She was playing it at full blast at an unearthly hour. I ran out to the stereo and turned it off.
May the good Lord be with.
"What are you doing? Do you know what time it is?" She looked at me. "Almost 6. Relax, it wasn't on that loud." She looked at me as though she were a teenager. "Why are you up so early anyway? Didn't you go to bed late last night?" "Yes, I couldn't sleep. I have so much on my mind. There are a few projects I've started. And you get angry when I lie awake and toss and turn, and then the children come in and want a glass of water or to sleep with us." Once he attended an end-of-term show. Sat close to the wall to see the play we had rehearsed, in which I performed the main role. But unfortunately I had not studied it hard enough.
After the previous year's success, I was suffering from child hubris. I didn't need to learn all the lines. Everything would be fine, I had thought. But standing there, affected, I suppose, by my father's presence, I could barely remember a line. And our teacher prompted me all the way through a long play about a town of which I was supposed to be the mayor. In the car on the way home, he said he'd never been so embarrassed in his life. And he would never attend any of my end-of-term shows again. That was a promise he kept. Nor did he go to any of the countless soccer matches I played in as I was growing up. He was never one of the parents who drove to away games, never one of the parents who watched home matches. I saw him in my mind's eye when we went skiing together once in Hova, gliding in and out of the trees, Dad 10 meters in front of me, perhaps 20, because despite the fact that his equipment was new, he couldn't ski. He staggered forward, almost like a senile old man, with no balance, no flow, no pace. And if there was one thing I did not want, it was to be associated with that figure, which is why I always hung back. I was embarrassed by him. At that time, I had no idea that he had bought all this skiing equipment and driven us to the far side of Trumoya in an attempt to get close to me. We walked to a bench at the end of the parking lot. Last time I saw Dad, he talked about setting up as a truck driver. Oh? Ingvar said. When was that? Winter, year and a half ago, when I was in Kristiansand writing. Poor Dad, I said. Ingvar looked at me. If there's anyone you shouldn't feel sorry for, it's him, he said. For a while, Dad had tried to get closer to me. I remembered that well. It was the year Mom had done a continuing education course in Oslo. Because the autumn afterward, Dad took me fishing in the morning before school. We used to get up at 6. It was as dark outside as at the bottom of a well. And cold, particularly on the sea. I was frozen and wanted to go home. But I was with Dad. There was no point in whining. There was no point in saying anything. I hated this. I was always cold. And it was my job to grab the trawl float and pull up the first lengths of net while he maneuvered the boat. And if I missed the floats, he gave me an earful. As he powered back and forth, glaring at me with those wild eyes of his in the autumn darkness off Trumoya. You had to tough it out. 2 hours later, we were back, just in time for me to catch the school bus. The garden was completely overgrown. The grass was knee-high, like a meadow, grayish-yellow in color. 2 large seagulls took off from the steps as we drove up the gentle slope. The space in front of the garage door was covered with sacks and garbage bags. That was what had been entertaining the gulls.
The doctor came out the moment we sat down in the waiting room. Friendliness, caring, impersonal professionalism. But Linda was a very different person. Now she was bristling with energy and impatience when she sat down. Nothing could go fast enough. She started talking long before the doctor had taken a seat. "You said there would always be someone here I could talk to. But I called and you were on holiday. And there was no one else to talk to. That's not good enough. I needed you. I really needed you." She began to cry. I didn't understand a thing, and looked at her, then at the doctor. "I'm very sorry about that," the doctor said. "There was a misunderstanding. You should have been given my colleague to talk to." "That's not good enough. I've been so frightened. I've been so frightened." The doctor looked at her without saying anything. "How are you?" "Things are moving faster and faster," Linda said. "It's as though soon I won't be able to hang on, if you understand what I mean." "Are you sleeping?" "No, I hardly sleep. Can I be admitted to the hospital and have some sleeping tablets for one night only? I just have to go home and pack first." "Of course. But it's a good idea, Linda. I think it'll do you good." I tried to understand what was going on as they talked. Why did she burst into tears? She hadn't said a word to me about her fears. Linda was happy again. "I'll come home tomorrow morning. The children won't even notice I've been away." I was bewildered. I started to clean up the apartment. Linda's friend helped me. We had never actually talked. Now we did. Once Linda had visited her in Stockholm, she said, many years ago. Then she'd been as high as she was now. She'd taken a bath with her friend's little daughter, and more or less demanded to be treated like her. What I didn't understand was how she could accept that. She'd accepted it at the time, and had accepted it here. But this clearly wasn't Linda. And I refused to give any room to what wasn't Linda. I didn't want to see it. At 7:30, the phone rang. It was Linda. "How was it?" I asked. "It was fantastic," she said. "I've never slept so well. And they've been so nice to me. There are some fantastic people here. How's it going at home?" "Fine. When will you be home, do you think?" That's what I was going to tell you. The doctors here say they'd like to keep me in for one more night, to get the best possible effect. I don't think that's such a stupid idea. Then I'll be able to rest properly." "Mommy just called," I said. "She won't be home until tomorrow." "Why not?" Vanya said. "You know she's been sleeping badly the past few nights, don't you?" Four or five patients sat watching TV, trembling, taciturn, pale. Linda came out of one room. She lit up when she saw me, gave me a big hug and a kiss on the lips. "This is my husband," she said loudly to everyone there. "Well, you do have a handsome man, Linda," a lively old lady called out. "He's the best writer in Norway," Linda said. "It's absolutely true." The patients sitting there, disabled or slumped, all with dark, vacant eyes, looked across at us. "You should see my room," Linda said. "It's so cozy." She led me into a room. "This is where I live," she said, extending her arms. "But I need a few things from home. I've written a list. Or perhaps you can bring them with you next time? Look there," she said, pointing to the wall where 2 drawings hung. "2 twins drew them," she said. "They remind me of myself when I was young. They're 20 at most, princesses of the night. They don't sleep either. They're acrobats. They're absolutely terrific. But I was going to talk to the senior nurse. They'll come and get you." Patting the duvet. "Sit down." She put her arm around me and wanted to kiss me. I leaned away. There was a knock at the door. The same nurse who had opened the door for me escorted us to the office. Linda answered all the questions with wit, in detail, and at great length. They smiled, all of them. I could see she was a kind of favorite. "There's just one thing I have to say," Linda said. "I know this won't sound good because it'll give the impression that I'm an elitist or something like that. It's an inescapable fact that some of the nurses in the ward are so... but they're a bit on the slow side. I'm a writer. I do radio. I'm a professional woman. And I'm used to a certain level, if you see what I mean. But there's practically no one to talk to here." I felt a strong urge to duck. I didn't. I retained my composure and watched her as she spoke. "But now your husband's here. He may have a few questions to ask." "2," I said, "and they're of a practical nature. We have 3 children. They have to see Linda, of course. How shall we do it?" "I'm not so keen for them to come here." "You could meet in the park," the doctor suggested. "That would be all right, wouldn't it? How long is she going to be here, do you think?" I looked at Linda as I said that. It didn't feel good to refer to her as she. She just smiled as if to say, "Look what a clever husband I have." "It's impossible to say, my dear man," the doctor said, getting up. "But we'd like to stabilize you a bit, Linda, before you go home." "The medicine isn't working," Linda said, looking at me. "From what I understand, I'm being given big doses, but they're not working at all." "Well, there's a lot of energy in you." "Okay," I said. "We're not talking days, then?" "Probably not," the doctor said. "Now I'm going on holiday, so there'll be another doctor coming tomorrow. But she's even better than me, so that won't be a problem." "And just as I was beginning to like you." He laughed, shook hands, and the whole entourage followed him out. Linda came toward me and took my hand, pulled me to the bed. "What do you think of the doctor? Isn't he great? Eastern European, Hungarian, or Romanian, or something like that. Shame he's going on holiday. Typical." I bit my lip to stop myself from crying. "Karl Ove, shall we go out for a cigarette?" she said. "Sure." And we took the elevator down, came to a paved area with a shed where 2 old men were smoking. She held my face and straightened it, as if to say I had to look at her. Our eyes met. She stretched up and kissed me. As I turned, I welled up. I cried all the way home, almost blinded by tears. But when I was at home, sitting on the balcony and smoking, my eyes were dry. A situation had arisen, and it had to be dealt with. The following day I arranged with the senior nurse for Linda to come home for an hour. She wasn't allowed to walk on her own, so I dressed the kids and we went to pick her up. She had such energy, they had said. Medicines were ineffective against her mania, and they were giving her as much as they could. The children were chatting away as usual as we walked past the big building site. Linda watched children's TV with them for a few minutes. She had Yon on her lap. As soon as her attention wandered from the children, her face assumed an extremely distant expression. After a little while, Linda came out and headed for the hall. I looked in on her. She was sitting in front of her laptop, writing on Facebook. I could see she wanted to be somewhere else. "You've only got 40 minutes left," I said. "Can't you stay with the children?" "Soon," she said. "Just doing this." "We have to go now." "You don't need to accompany me," she said. "It's absolutely unnecessary. I can do it on my own." "But they said you shouldn't walk on your own. They expressly said I had to be with you." "I'll walk back on my own so that you and the children can stay here." "Okay," I said. "Let's do that then." When she opened the elevator door, she looked at me and winked, kissed her fingertips, and blew me a kiss. At just after 9, the hospital rang. "Is she with you now?" "Linda? No. She left for the hospital 2 hours ago." "Hasn't she arrived?" "No. But didn't you accompany her? That was the deal we made, wasn't it?" I hung up and called Linda's mobile. It wasn't on. I tried again a little later, and since it was still off then as well, I went to bed. The next morning I called her ward. Linda was there. She had arrived at around midnight, the nurse said. "Hi, I've got a new nurse. You should meet him. Turns out he's read Mein Kampf. Hitler's, that is. I think he does martial arts and has a combat dog." "Linda," I said, "yesterday you were supposed to go straight back to your ward." "Oh, that. I've already discussed that with the nurse. I just wanted to go out for a little walk. Nothing dangerous." "Where did you go?" "Molevangen. Around there." "Are you going to visit me afterwards?" "Good. It'll be good to see you again. Could you bring some money with you? I've run out." She talked about nurses and patients as though they were people she had known for many years. She talked about the ward as though it were a romantic sanatorium in a Thomas Mann novel. She talked about all her plans, everything she was going to do, and showed me a notebook in which she had already written quite a number of pages. "Shall we go and have a smoke?" We stood outside for 10 minutes, smoking. Linda found it impossible to stand still. I saw that she could hardly wait for me to go. "See you later, then." "Yes, see you," and turned to 2 other patients standing there as I set off. And I went to the balcony, surrounded by the sounds of the city and the warm August air. I inhaled the smoke into my lungs and thought about what was happening to Linda. She agreed to everything I said to give me the impression she was closer to me than she was in reality. As soon as I was out of sight, she changed direction and wandered into town. She would say she loved me. But as soon as I was there, she felt an obligation she couldn't deal with, because it tied her. And it was these bonds she was fleeing. She had been as low as it was possible for any human to be. She'd been unable to articulate this, and was overcome with thoughts of death. It was obvious she wouldn't be able to control the light inside her afterward, which made everything easy and good, but she had to follow it, because beneath the light, at the end of the wave carrying her further and further upward, was the darkness. She knew that. Once she had told me that a nurse had said to her during a manic spell, "Remember that really you are sad." But what was the really and the not really in this? The following morning we had another meeting with the doctor. Linda put on another show. She was charming, lively, made everyone laugh. She showed great self-awareness and joked about her manic state. She just wanted everything to move faster, 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 faster. She couldn't sit still. She couldn't stay on the same topic, had to interrupt, intercede with something new. If I said anything, she stared at me impatiently, finished my sentences for me, knew what I was going to say long before I said it. In that sense, she was brilliant. But the fact that she didn't care about what lay beneath, the sluggishness and the ugliness, or didn't want to see it, meant her brilliance was a cover-up and became a place for herself, the only place she could bear to be. I saw how she had to fight to keep everything together when we visited her. Everything in her personality was in turmoil. Her 10-year-old self could manifest itself. Her teenage self could manifest itself. Her erotic self, which was usually hidden and only revealed itself to me, could manifest itself. There was nothing to keep the various elements in check. Her manic forces hurled everything out. Everything in her wanted to rise, and she rose higher and higher, while becoming more and more exhausted. A lot became clear to me during these days. What Linda dreamed of was to live a perfectly ordinary life, to have an ordinary job, go to the cabin on the weekends, and work in the garden with the children running around her. During all the years of childbearing, breastfeeding, and having little ones, she had fought. Her whole personality, the one I had settled down with, and her whole language had been erased in the life we'd lived. She hadn't had any such distance until now, rising above all the ties and obligations and wanting to be utterly free. But the freedom was false. The freedom was a deception. The freedom was a circus in daylight. She saw it perhaps as glittering lights. She saw it perhaps as magical. But when I looked at her, what I saw was the exhaustion, the unsteadiness on her feet, the worthless, the false, all the people who had no hope, and therefore had nothing. In the midst of all this, Jon's 3rd birthday loomed. Linda wanted to join us at the school. She had asked the doctor, who had said it was fine. I was not convinced it was a good idea. There was a shrill side to her now, which came out in social situations, and I was not keen for Heidi and Jon to see it. She rang the doorbell of the apartment at 11. She wore heavy green eyeshadow, a red skirt, purple tights, and high heels, and dyed her hair black. "Shall we go and get some cake and fruit?" "Can we have a cup of coffee first?" "Yes, of course." Linda?
Yes?
It might be best if you don't go to the school. It'll be very intense, you know.
Yes, it'd be wonderful not to have to go.
That's good to hear.
But can I buy him some presents? I can do that, can't I?
Of course. We can do it together. She came, and we decided to skip the meal. Jon wanted to go straight to the cake. We ate cake. They were each given a present, and then Jon got the rest of his in the living room. Suddenly, in the middle of unpacking a large present, she got up and went to the balcony. Linda moved to the bedroom and logged onto Facebook. She was writing when I entered. "It's gone very well," I said.
"I couldn't stand any more," she said. "I can only take a little at a time."
"I know, but that's enough."
"It's always struck me that I was a sailor's wife. You went to sea and left me on my own. But now it's the other way around. Now I'm the sailor."
She laughed. I laughed too, because she was wearing her striped sweater and did a sailor's salute. "Now I'm casting my moorings." And then she was gone. A few hours later they called from the hospital and asked if Linda was at home. I apologized, saying it had been impossible to accompany her because of the children. The following day I asked her what she had done. She said she had just drifted around a little. Been to a few bars, talked to people. One man she had spoken to, my age, visited her just before I arrived later that week. She said they were good friends. I had never seen or heard of them. Early on Monday morning, Linda came home to be there on Vanya's first day of school. I was apprehensive about her appearance, hoping she wouldn't turn up in green eyeshadow and purple tights. But she didn't. Linda and I sat next to each other looking at Vanya in the middle of this group of children. After half an hour, Linda leaned toward me and whispered she had to go. Only 20 minutes later, it was over, and I walked to the cafe, where Linda talked and could finally go wherever her mind led her. The doctors suggested electroshock therapy. They called it by a different name, but that is what it was. They wanted to halt the mania in its tracks. She was given an appointment, but when the time came, she didn't turn up. One afternoon she came with me to pick up the children. First Heidi and Jon, who we took with us to Vanya's school. But Vanya was nowhere to be seen. "I'll go behind there and look for her," I said. Linda was speaking with one of the teachers, with Heidi clinging to her leg. "Where's Jon?" I said.
"I don't know," Linda said. "I'm not responsible for them now."
Again and again, I misjudged her. There by the playground equipment, he was staring at the bigger children. I lifted him up and took him back with me.
Then I met Linda, and the sun rose. I can't find a better way to express it. The sun rose in my life. The last night came. We were assembled in the largest room. The first time I set eyes on Linda was in the summer of 1999. Standing outside a building with the sun on her face, wearing sunglasses, at a seminar for new Nordic writers. She was thin and beautiful, and there was something about her I wanted the second I saw her, a kind of explosion. We were put in the same group. She introduced herself. Linda Bostrom. The course lasted 5 days. I circled around her the whole time. The next day everyone went for a walk in the forest, and I was beside Linda, first in the line. And those behind us fell away, and I was alone with her in the forest. There was nothing of the dark, deep-set, alluring eyes now. She was all lightness and coquettishness, twisting and twirling the grass, smiling, looking at me, looking down. It was a kind of end-of-course party. I suddenly found myself beside Linda. She was opening a bottle of wine and placed her hand over mine, gently stroking it while looking into my eyes. It was obvious. It was decided. 3 in the morning, when I was as drunk as I had seldom been, I left with her. I said there was something I had to tell her, and then I told her. Exactly what I felt and what I had planned. I believe you like me, I'm fairly sure of that, but I'm not enough for you. And you know that, deepest down. She said, I like you well enough, you're a great guy, but I'm not interested in you. I'm sorry, but your friend, he's really fantastic. I'm interested in him, do you understand? Yes, I said. I turned and crossed the square. Aware that behind me she was walking in the opposite direction, back to the party. Past the crowd standing outside the house, through the hallway, and into my room. Went into the bathroom, grabbed the glass on the sink and hurled it at the wall with all the strength I could muster. Then Linda came home. First she phoned late at night. She was absolutely hysterical. She hadn't been given any food. She'd smashed a glass in her fury. Extra staff had been called. It was humiliating. And one evening, one of the nurses there knelt in front of Linda and told her she had to go back to her husband and children. This had gone on for long enough and wasn't leading anywhere. She had begun to talk at a normal speed about normal things, to tell us she longed to be with us. Now she wanted to come home. And then one morning, she came home with her backpack. And it was over. It was over. We talked for several hours. She was as she had been before. Everything was good. The next morning she was on a high and restless again. She embraced her children when they came back from school and said she was staying. "Can you sleep now?" Vanya said. "Yes," she said. We stayed up chatting that evening. She was worn out, quiet. But when she looked at me, it was Linda looking at me, no one else.
I've been on a long journey. Yes. Now I'm home. Yes, I said, but it was no big deal. Okay, she said. And now we know where we stand. Perhaps it will happen again. It might. But we know it's not a problem. You're just on your travels.